Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm here today with defense reporter Mike Brest. Mike, the fallout from the Afghanistan withdrawal continues. We've had officers in the military critical of military leadership and civilian leadership for how that was handled, for how it was executed, and some have faced some consequences for that. Let's talk a little bit about the politicization of dissent over the Afghanistan policy in the military.
Absolutely. So one thing that we've seen is that a number of service members have spoken out against military leaders about the evacuation. One example is Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Sheller, who has been referred to the Uniform Code of Military Justice for insubordination, essentially. And so he was placed in the brig, sort of in detention, awaiting a hearing. But after an agreement was struck between his representation and the military, he's been released awaiting that hearing.
And there have been a lot of people in the military who were displeased,
Absolutely.
With the people who were left behind, with the Afghan allies who were left behind. What sort of things are you hearing from people, from veterans groups, about how they perceive this to have gone down?
So a lot of people that I've spoken to have been frustrated. They're upset. And a lot of these feelings aren't going away just because it's been a couple weeks since the end of the war. A lot of these feelings are continuing to grow as we learn more and more about the last couple weeks the U.S. spent in Afghanistan.
And there have been some calls for accountability. The Inspector General testified before Congress, and he had some fairly strong words for military leadership and others, not just about how the withdrawal was handled, but really the whole 20-year war.
Absolutely. The Special Inspector General, John Sopko, testified in front of the House Foreign Affairs Committee yesterday. And one thing that he said that was pretty notable was that he urged Congress to hold leaders accountable for what happened over the last 20 years, specifically referencing the last 10 in particular. And so he practically implored members of the committee to do what was necessary to hold both congressional, presidential, and military leaders to account for the actions and decisions that have been made over the last 2 decades.
Now, moving away from Afghanistan, the pandemic is still going on. There have been moves to require both the service members, the members of the military, and also civilian employees of the Pentagon to require them to begin to get vaccinated against COVID-19. And there has been some disagreement on that subject about whether the exemptions are generous enough. What is the status of the vaccine mandates for the military?
So each military branch has their own vaccine deadline for their soldiers or civilians to get vaccinated by. The earliest one is coming up next month. And so we've seen a lot of back and forth between specific members of the services come out against the vaccine, say they don't want to take it, or say they don't think it's necessary because they've already had COVID. There's an impending court case that is working through the judicial system as we speak that relates to whether or not people who have been vaccinated should be required to get the vaccine. But at the same time, we've seen hundreds of thousands of troops already get it, and they haven't complained. There haven't been significant reports of people falling ill, and as Secretary Austin has said, this is about readiness.
And there are some bona fide exemptions.
Absolutely. As DOD has said repeatedly, if people or service members believe through either religion or medical advice, can seek an exemption from the vaccine should they feel it's necessary.
And the Biden administration has opposed honorable discharges for people who violate the mandate. Is that correct?
That is. And so that was something that was a big question mark as this process was moving along, was whether or not people who refuse to get vaccinated should be honorably or dishonorably discharged depending on their refusal. And so we've seen Republicans in Congress take up the issue on behalf of these service members' defense, but when pressed on the issue, the Biden administration came out against it.
Thank you, Mike. You can read Mike and his coverage and the rest of our national security team at WashingtonExaminer.com.